Hey guys, real quick before we start the video, I want to direct you to the community tab on my channel. I am currently running an event for you, the viewers, to rate every single Monster Hunter monster from 1 to 5 stars. This project is going to be a bit of a run back from the 20th anniversary popularity poll and is meant to allow everyone to voice their opinion on every monster, so we can get a big picture look at how the whole community feels about the entire Monster Hunter bestiary. There will be a new poll on the community tab every single day at noon Eastern Standard Time, and all polls will remain live on the channel, so you can answer any of them at any time. You will not miss out if you miss the poll for the day. I will be updating numbers all the way from now until the end of October when the last polls have been run, and in October or November, we're going to have a massive video event where your comments will be read, all the numbers will be crunched, and the monsters will be reordered based on how you all voted. Every vote on every poll matters, and anyone has a chance to have their comment read in the video itself. And if you want to help me get more data and reach the broader Monster Hunter community, I'd appreciate a like on this video and, maybe hit the subscribe button to help this channel grow. It'll put me and this project in front of more eyes. Okay, no more YouTuber CTA shilling. Here's the video you actually clicked on. Thank you. A lot of the time, it is limitation, not freedom, that is the true ally of creativity. First generation Monster Hunter got a lot of mileage off the tiny amount of rigged skeletons that it had to work with. This meant that we got a number of animal species in Monster Hunter that had smaller adolescent members present in the game, species with sexual dimorphism, and eventually animals that developed variations due to natural processes, trauma, or from the fact that they developed into easily recognizable subspecies. Eventually, I'd love to cover how Monster Hunter is able to take a singular animal and stretch it specifically into a variety of forms. However, what I want to talk about today is another and less discussed way in which Monster Hunter was able to draw blood from stone and fill out the game's early ecology due to limited resources. And that would be the creation of monsters with extremely close relations to other separate species of animals. Now, let me try to specify things here. Closely related monsters can be a very broadly applied term. I'm talking about monster connections less broad than just monster classifications. All monsters that fall under the flying wyvern category presumably have a traceable progenitor flying wyvern that they all descended from. In that sense, they should be somewhat close related in like a cosmological kind of way. But for the purpose of this video, we can definitely get more specific. We have some official and some speculative work about Monster Hunter phylogeny and taxonomy. I apologize in advance if I pass off any fan canon as fact here, but a lot of this work has been translated and sourced from official work put out by Capcom. I'm mostly interested in monsters that fall under the same family categorization, as well as monsters that are categorized within the same infraorders and superfamilies as each other, according to the information that Capcom has put out there. Now, I'm sure the real-world taxonomy chart is more complex than what Monster Hunter provides, and I'm sure someone who knows real-world phylogeny quite well may be able to poke holes in what is currently considered canon. But I think it's sick that this even exists, that this amount of thought and effort was put into the boss enemies in a video game series. That charts like these can even be made at all is one of the reasons I think Monster Hunter has possibly the best creature design in all of video games, and without exaggeration, I'd say some of the best in fiction. So why do I care at all about monsters who dwell in the same family as each other? Why is that even relevant? Could it be argued that monsters made for the same families with this level of closeness to one another could be a mark of laziness, that the developers are reusing the majority of a monster's assets, making a few minor changes, and then just slapping that together and calling it a brand new animal? What's so creative about a mostly recycled product? Well, like I said up top, sometimes creativity comes from restrictions and not freedom. If Monster Hunter is going to have speculative evolution baked into its creature design, then naturally these close relations need to occur. That's how evolution works. Organisms split off from one another and go their own way and become similar yet different organisms. So functionally, we have to have animals in this world that have obvious similarities in size, shape, weight, habitat, ability, adaptation, coloration, and or diet, amongst other things, in order for this whole ecosystem that we want to make in Monster Hunter to even work. These animals have to exist in the world of Monster Hunter. What Capcom quite often does, and I don't blame them for this at all, is they more or less say, yes, all these species do exist off-screen. They are simply undiscovered, or not a problem that the guild needs to solve, or they went extinct. But let's say that the developers have limited time and resources and have to cut some corners, or maybe they just have a really neat idea for a monster that is similar to a pre-existing species. It's been confirmed that that's kind of what happened with Raban, who we'll talk about in a bit. This is where the creativity is going to come in, because what can you change about a monster to justify it being a new species within the taxonomic family of another species, or superfamily, or infraorder, or whatever? How much is too much change? How much is too little? Would this new creature idea better serve as a subspecies rather than as an original animal? In what ways do you change the physicality of the monster? What do those changes mean? All of a sudden, this becomes an incredibly thin tightrope to walk on. How do you thread the needle of all these restrictions in a way that is compelling? Well, let's look at Monster Hunter's work thus far. First off, we have probably the most well-known close relations in Monster Hunter. The first generation's Blos family, consisting of the Monoblos and Diablos, two massive, herbivorous, tan-colored, flightless, hyper-aggressive, horn-adorned flying wyverns that dwell within desert regions and are capable of digging beneath the sand. They are enormously similar as animals and borderline the exact same as video game enemies. We can talk about the two's combat history and how to give Monoblos more of its own identity in another video, but for now, all we really care about is how they function as animals. The key difference between Monoblos and Diablos are their heads, the shapes of their crests, the placement of their horns, and the formation of their mouths. I will point you towards Unnatural History Channel's video on these guys as he breaks down the potential ramifications of these two's dissimilarities very thoroughly, and I'm borrowing some of his ideas for this script. One of the first things he tackles in his video is the shape and composition of Monoblos and Diablos' mouths and teeth, and how the differences there can be used to make educated guesses regarding what they eat. Diablos use their odd teeth to crush up cacti, whilst Monoblos use their beaks to cut through more hardy and woody vegetation. It's just by observing this specific difference that we can understand why Monoblos and Diablos exist at the same time. Despite all the things they do share, habitat, combat adaptations, and behavior, they do not share a diet, or at least there are very broad chunks of their diet that don't overlap, and thus they don't compete with each other for food that much. Unnatural History Channel even suggests that Diablos might be a cacti specialist, that the way that his mouth works means that he might not be able to properly ingest other bits of organic matter all that well. This might honestly be the coolest difference between the two. The variations in their mouths likely tells the story of how these two separate species came to be. Perhaps Monoblos evolved from a previous species and outcompeted their ancestors, becoming much better at claiming and defending tough vegetation. Their outmatched ancestors had to adapt and move towards cacti, eventually dying out and giving birth to the Diablo species. It could be even more complex than that, as if you look at the horns and the crest that these animals have, they almost certainly don't serve the same purpose, and there's even more divulging between these two evolutionary paths. We know that the interlocking horns of a Diablos are used for tests of strength between the two members of the species, resulting in these enormous shoving battles. Monoblos have no such interlocking horns, so their whole display of strength and mating worthiness probably comes from their much larger horn-adorned crests that's used for display, and it also probably grants a much better protection to his neck than Diablos' crest does. In spite of their enormously similar combat in the actual games, these are two truly different animals with their own behaviors and niche in the desert. More can certainly be done to make these two feel distinct in the games. Monoblos really just needs a proper chance to be made different. These two, understandably, started life nearly identical in terms of gameplay when they debuted in Monster Hunter 1. Monster Hunter 1 is a very limited game in what it could do. But since then, Diablos has had the benefit of being a series regular, while Monoblos has had an enormous fall off off from grace after being one of the first generation's most significant monsters. And almost every time Monoblos has come back, the developers have struggled to give him anything that Diablos doesn't already have. Diablos' long career also means we've seen him do a lot more. We've been shown more about him. We've seen their tests of strength against one another. We've been shown their relationships with the cactus patches that they tend to and eat from. We've seen how they spar with would-be predators, and we've been witness to the absolute pinnacle of their species' potential in the form of the bloodbath Diablos. Monoblos has not had the same amount of cutscenes and ecological interactions as Diablos, hasn't been given any turf wars or anything like that to show off how it would fight and how it would interact with other animals, and he's just been given so much less time to show what makes him different. Monoblos has been in desperate need of love and attention for a long time. I have illustrated that these two are indeed not clones of one another. Ideally, they would fight differently, occupy different areas of the desert, have different turf wars, interact with their species in different ways. That's not the case in the games now, but the building blocks for that to be the case do exist. Monoblos' failings to differentiate himself come from a meta issue. He is not an uninspired or wholly derivative creature. To showcase this, let's look at probably the most successful incarnation of what we're talking about, the infraorder Hammer Wyvern, which features Uragon and Raban. Now, these two divulge at the infraorder level, as I said, not at the family level, and are probably a good deal more genetically removed from each other than Diablos and Monoblos are. But in terms of video game enemies, these two capture exactly why I think these closely related species are such a great idea. There's a lot to compare between Raban and Uragon. At first glance, they kind of seem like they're the same animal. Same massive chin used for slamming attacks, same sound design, same sleep gas dispersal, same ability to curl up into a ball and roll around, same massive size, same general shape, same method of eating, same disposition towards covering themselves in tar to fuse other items to their bodies, similar heavy and slow fighting style. Unlike Monoblos and Diablos, the differences here are a lot more radical. Their habitats are completely different. They have dissimilar move pools, and Uragon has the fire element at his disposal. In Monster Hunter, big, broad changes in monsters like habitat swapping and elemental shifts and color palette changes are usually given to a subspecies. So what makes Raban special? Why isn't he a subspecies? Why is he a different animal? In short, Raban takes what Uragon does, uses the same fundamentals, but in such a different way and with different mechanisms that he kind of has to be a separate animal. The biggest instigator of these differences is that Raban's gameplay is almost completely built around the use of the bones in the Rotten Vale. Looking at these two's most prominent gimmick first. When an Uragon rolls, it grinds down the nubs on its back till they're flat. Maintaining these is key for an Uragon, since they're a big part of helping him keep his balance while rolling and can help him change directions more easily. Additionally, his heavy chin serves as his center of gravity while rolling, which is why its weight and shape are so meticulously cared for. Now look at Raban. His chin is a bit smaller and lacks the coating of ground down ores that Uragon fuses to his chin, and the nubs on his back are pointed on the ends. They're not ground down. Raban has no need to maintain these parts of his body at the same level that Uragon does, because the steering and speed control and sturdiness of his rolling is much more so dependent on the bones he fuses to his body with tar. Because of this enormous difference between the two, Raban has much tighter rolling control, can pull off more elaborate spinning maneuvers, needs to be in a different environment, is much more dependent on tar than Uragon, has a much softer shell than Uragon, uses less chin attacks, has a different diet, and has a completely different set of instincts and behavioral tendencies. And Uragon will display its intelligence by carving out and then battling within parts of its volcanic territory that have wall surfaces that allow him more movement control. A Raban shows its intelligence by meticulously handpicking the bones he applies to his body, choosing the sturdiest he can find and knowing exactly where to fuse what types of bone on his body. The result here is two wildly different monsters in terms of gameplay. Raban's faster, more precise, more agile spinning simply wouldn't work on a recolored Uragon. His bone flinging works quite different from Uragon's bomb deployment. The lack of extreme heat means that Raban cannot ignite its sleep gas like Uragon can. Once again, we have two very distinct animals, only this time, developer experience and proper care has resulted in a palpable difference in how Uragon and Raban fight and interact with their environments. difference. And I think most people would even agree that the younger Raban is the superior monster, that by creating this close relative of Uragon, fan perception of this rolling, chin-slamming, brute wyvern gimmick probably went up. Maybe Uragon got a little more respect too? I'm not sure about that. He's still not exactly a beloved monster. And this is where I think we have a neat spectrum of close relation monsters, as opposed to monsters like subspecies and variants and rare species. With Monoblos and Diablos, their differences are almost too small, too specific for them to be variations of the same animal. The differences don't so much lie in their abilities, it's how their weaponry is applied, how and what they eat, how they avoid competition with each other, how relations between their species works. They both still dig and charge and fight with huge horns and live in the desert, and they're both still super aggressive, but it's the small inner workings in their respective species that keeps them apart. The only time in which members of the same species in Monster Hunter will have very subtle changes like this are regional subspecies, which isn't even really an official term. Due to new models and new animations and some attention to detail regarding where they are in the world, you might have wraths with different builds or spike sizes and wing colorations, and then very famously, old and new worlds and ogres are quite different in terms of power level, but these still have the exact same name as their original monsters and aren't regarded as different entities within the video games. And then back to the other end of things, typically, a subspecies needs to have a pretty big change to warrant it being regarded as its own thing. A brand new coloration, a new habitat, new attacks, new element use. Stuff like this is used to justify creating a unique variation of an established monster. Raban and Uragon are so different that they kind of bypass certain restrictions that exist for a subspecies. Their bodies are too different. The way that they function and move is too different. The way their armor and rolling works is too different. They have similar traits, but those traits are powered by different apparatuses. I can't quite think of a subspecies in Monster Hunter that utilizes different tools to create similar results quite like Raban and Uragon do. But feel free to let me know if you think there's any instances where this might apply. I think what we see here, and what my point with this video was, is that in creating monsters that have these close genetic ties, but can rationally be considered separate species, you have room for minor detail shifts or major biological upheavals that would not work if the variation you were creating was the same monster species. Raban and Diablos don't exist without these precise kinds of changes, and the creativity required to work around the borders of your typical monster variations. And these are just my absolute favorite examples, and I'd say the two best sets of monsters to look at when considering why these closely related animals are so cool. But they're far from the only examples. I've sung the praises of Nargacuga and Tigrex many times on this channel, and how they created this amazing subsect of feline-esque quadrupedal flying wyverns. This leads to the creation of Barioth, who's my favorite of the three, and a close relative of Nargacuga. The swarm of early game raptor monsters in the series, or runner wyverns as they're called, can be neatly divided into three categories. The largest of the three, that being the dog wyverns, have this exceptionally broad range of shapes and elements and habitats and pack interactions. All of them are unified by their muzzle-like face structures and their broader body in comparison to the other two categories of runner wyverns. I had no idea until I did this video that Bonboro was a close relation to Kestodon and Gastodon, and that like Monoblos and Diablos, Kestodon and Gastodon slot into the same family category. Yeon Kutku and Yeon Garuga are another pair of exceptional monsters that are super similar yet enormously different at the same time, like the hammer wyverns are. They possess similar frames and bodies, flame sacks, huge ears, and a similar soundscape, but one is a doofy, clumsy weirdo who just wants to eat bugs, and the other's a bird demon. Tobikadachi, Wolg, and Odogaron all share the Grand Claw Wyvern superfamily. When I learned that, it reminded me that they all have this kind of similar low, long posture, and a couple of shared animations here and there. I wish this list was made when Sunbreak was out, because I'd love to know if Odogaron and Lunagaron have even closer relations than that, considering the shared Garon in their names. I'd absolutely love to see more monsters like Monoblos and Diablos, where the small changes make the big differences, and the evolutionary split appears to be more recent. But I think Monster Hunter has overall done an excellent job tying their creatures together, and slowly making their phylogeny tree more complex. And the even cooler thing is that there's monster families, super families, and infraorders out there still that only have one entry. One of the super cool things about Legiana, for example, is that they use their huge wings more like boat sails, catching onto wind currents and adjusting the orientation of their wings so that they can be pulled around instead of flapping around. They dwell alone in the expanding wing wyvern superfamily. That means that there's precedent for you to have other flying wyverns that use wind currents blowing through canyons or from volcanic activity to carry themselves around like that. We have the incoming Raydao that could potentially be a somewhat close relative of Astalos, since Astalos is currently the sole member of the electric wyvern superfamily. You could have fun with other crownhead wyverns related to Baroth that have maybe larger or spikier, pronged, or maybe projectile launching head crests. Give Larenoth some friends, make more sauropod monsters in the Oddneck superorder. The awesome thing about the establishment of all these families and orders is that the Monster Hunter developers have given themselves so many excellent templates to then play around with and modify and push and pull in weird directions. And since this is me, and I'd be asked about it if I didn't bring these guys up, yes, Frontier has 2 whole categories of monsters that pretty much did exactly what we're talking about, and a couple of these monsters I think you could totally pull into mainline if you wanted to. The Burst and Origin species, as they are in Frontier, are about as subtle as a wrecking ball, but they sure make for some awesome relative monsters that do exactly what I was just talking about. You have an old relative of Gravios that dwells out in desert habitats. He has these massive moss-covered pores all over him, from which he can expel gigantic quantities of water that it takes into his body. You have this more ancient and savage species of Rajang out there, with skin like stone that he can ignite like a flint. There's a close relative of Teostra with icy reinterpretations of many of Teostra's attacks and gimmicks. There's an ethereal relative of the Wraths out there that is smart enough to adapt its battle strategies in the midst of combat, and can fight by firing off these brilliant bolts of energy from his body. There's even a relative of Diablos out there that was seduced by the Dark Lord Melkor, only to flee deep beneath the Misty Mountains when its master was defeated and banished from this world. More of these closely related monsters in Monster Hunter would be awesome. I get it. The developers don't want to be repetitive, and they're genuinely smart people that consistently come up with awesome ways to dramatically overhaul their monster categories that they already have, which leads to new, broad super orders and orders. That's sick too. But I love monsters like these. Monsters that share relations with other creatures beyond just their general shape and broad categorization. Stuff like this makes the world feel thick and full and substantive. I'd love more monsters like Radoban that massively reassess the inner workings of a classic monster while maintaining a lot of the core DNA. And I love monsters like Monoblos and Diablos, where the intrigue is found in the tiny little details. I'm super excited to see what else Wilds' new monsters are going to have up their sleeves. The range of monster classifications that we know about in the game already, and the monsters themselves have me wicked excited. I hope it does some great work elaborating on the phylogeny of this world. And if you want to hear me ramble on more about awesome closely related species of monsters, I made this whole video discussing all 3 unique species of Carapacian from mainline Monster Hunter. You can check that out right here. But as for now, this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Stromlin, Sir Wafty, Sir Newt Newt, Shaggy Grizzly, Psychotic Jester, Peaberry, Nihilus Chimerax, Datboy Doing to Ding, I Think I Stole Your Sandwich, and Call Sign Shadow. Thank you very much, everyone.